The emergency alert on Dr. Maya Washington's phone screamed with red warnings as she rushed through the glass doors of Channel 7 News, her heart pounding with the knowledge that 50,000 lives hung in the balance. The supercell system she'd been tracking for 72 hours was accelerating beyond all previous models, and she had exactly 47 minutes to convince someone, anyone, to authorize the largest emergency evacuation in the city's history. Her modest consultant attire was carefully chosen to blend in, deliberately unremarkable to maintain the cover that had taken months to establish. At 35, Maya carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 15 years reading the sky's most dangerous secrets, coordinating disaster responses that had saved millions of lives across 3 continents. But today she was playing the most dangerous role of her career, a simple weather consultant trying to prevent a catastrophe. "You must be the weather consultant," Rebecca Turner said dismissively, barely looking up from her makeup mirror as Maya approached the anchor desk in the brightly lit studio. At 28, Rebecca had built her reputation on her camera-ready smile and ability to deliver news with unwavering confidence, even when discussing subjects far beyond her journalism degree. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and immaculate makeup spoke of someone who had never questioned whether her appearance opened doors that remained closed to others. "I hope you can keep this simple," Rebecca continued, her tone polite but clearly uninterested. "Our viewers want facts, not fear-mongering from consultants looking for attention." Maya's jaw tightened as she pulled out her emergency data tablet, the screen displaying satellite imagery that would terrify anyone who understood its implications. The rotation signatures were unlike anything she'd seen in her distinguished career. And the atmospheric conditions were creating a perfect storm that meteorology textbooks would study for decades. "Rebecca, this isn't about weather. This is about survival. We have an F5 tornado forming with rotation velocity that will destroy everything in a 12-mile path through the eastern districts." Rebecca's laugh was immediate and condescending, the sound echoing through the studio. "Anyone can print fake weather maps and throw around scary numbers. Real meteorologists don't work as freelance consultants. They have actual jobs with real institutions." The dismissal hit Maya like a physical blow, but what concerned her more was the precious time being wasted. Every second of ridicule was a second closer to disaster for the 50,000 people in the tornado's projected path, most of them families with children who would never see the morning if she couldn't break through Rebecca's prejudiced assumptions. "We're live in 30 seconds, the floor director called out, his voice cutting through Maya's growing desperation. "Rebecca, I need you to understand the severity of this situation," Maya tried again, leaning forward with an urgency that she rarely allowed herself to show. "This tornado system will hit the east side of the city, with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. We need to begin evacuation procedures immediately." Rebecca's demeanor transformed instantly as the cameras went live, her professional smile lighting up as she turned to face camera 1. "Good morning, I'm Rebecca Turner, and welcome to Channel 7 Morning News. We have some weather consultant here to discuss today's forecast, though I'm sure it's nothing we haven't seen before this time of year." The introduction stung with its casual dismissal, reducing Maya's decades of expertise to some weather consultant. But Maya remained composed, knowing that millions of viewers were watching, and her credibility would determine whether they lived or died. When tornado sirens began wailing in the distance, Maya desperately tried to show Rebecca the satellite data on her tablet. "Those sirens confirm what I've been telling you. We have 41 minutes before impact. Look at these rotation signatures." Rebecca's face twisted with rage as she suddenly grabbed Maya's tablet and slammed it down on the desk with a crack that echoed through the studio. "I said no fear-mongering on my show," she screamed, her professional composure completely shattered. Then, without warning, she shoved Maya hard in the chest, sending her stumbling backward into the guest chair. "Security! Remove this delusional woman from my studio immediately!" Rebecca shrieked, her voice cracking with indignation as she pointed an accusing finger at Maya. "I don't know what kind of publicity stunt this is, but I won't have some unqualified consultant disrupting my program." As security guards moved toward Maya, the studio lights flickered ominously. and the building's emergency weather system activated with a deafening alarm that drowned out Rebecca's continued protests. Maya straightened her jacket with quiet dignity, her eyes blazing with controlled authority as she looked directly into camera 1. Viewers, you have 38 minutes to evacuate the eastern districts before an F5 tornado makes landfall exactly where I predicted, Maya said with the calm precision of someone who had coordinated disasters affecting millions. Do not wait for official confirmation. Save your families now. Rebecca's face went pale as she realized this wasn't just some desperate consultant seeking attention. Something in Maya's voice carried an authority that transcended credentials, a certainty born from years of life and death decisions. That's impossible, Rebecca whispered. But Maya was already reaching for federal credentials that would change everything. If you believe that weather experts deserve respect during emergencies, type respect below. Then comment your country and city. Let's see where people stand for scientific expertise worldwide. Your participation shows that expertise knows no borders. The security guards hesitated as Maya's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Rebecca's hysterical demands. Something about the way Maya carried herself, the precision of her language, and the devastating accuracy of her predictions gave them pause. The tornado sirens continued wailing outside, and several crew members were checking their phones with growing concern. She's clearly unstable, Rebecca insisted, turning to the camera with a forced smile that couldn't quite mask her agitation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly why Channel 7 News verifies all our sources. We don't allow random consultants to spread panic on our airwaves. Maya remained standing beside the damaged tablet, her posture straight and dignified despite the physical assault she'd just endured. She recognized the pattern, the systematic dismissal, the refusal to engage with evidence, the assumption that her professional appearance somehow disqualified her from expertise. It was the same prejudice that had nearly cost lives in Hurricane Maria, when officials dismissed warnings from meteorologists who didn't fit their expectations. Rebecca, the rotation velocity has increased to 180 miles per hour, Maya said, her voice cutting through the studio noise with scientific precision. The mesocyclone is exhibiting characteristics of an EF5 tornado, with a damage path that will extend from Riverside Elementary through downtown and into the hospital district. Rebecca's laugh was sharp and dismissive. EF5? Mesocyclone? You're throwing around technical terms to sound impressive, but our regular meteorologist assured me this morning that today would be partly cloudy with occasional showers. Jim Peterson has been forecasting weather for this city for 15 years. Jim Peterson has a bachelor's degree in communications, Maya replied quietly. I have a PhD in atmospheric physics from MIT, with specialization in supercell dynamics and tornado genesis. I've coordinated emergency responses for 37 major weather events across 4 countries. The information hung in the air like a challenge, but Rebecca was too committed to her narrative to back down. Her entire career had been built on her ability to control information flow, to decide what was credible and what wasn't. The idea that she might be wrong, catastrophically wrong, was impossible to accept. Anyone can claim credentials, Rebecca said dismissively. The internet is full of people with fake degrees and made-up experience. What I see is someone disrupting a professional news broadcast with doomsday predictions and no verifiable authority. Maya felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. The burden of being perpetually questioned, perpetually doubted, regardless of her qualifications or track record. She had felt it in graduate school, when professors assumed she was there on affirmative action rather than merit. She had felt it in her first job, when colleagues questioned every prediction until her accuracy record became undeniable. And she felt it now, watching Rebecca's condescending smile while 50,000 lives hung in the balance. The studio's weather monitor began displaying increasingly urgent warnings from the National Weather Service, but Rebecca instructed the technical crew to minimize the alerts on screen. We don't want to frighten our viewers unnecessarily, she announced, as if managing public safety was part of her journalistic duties. Rebecca, look outside, Maya said, gesturing toward the studio windows, where the sky was taking on the greenish hue that experienced storm chasers learned to fear. The atmospheric pressure is dropping rapidly. The wind patterns are shifting exactly as my models predicted. Those aren't normal spring storms. They're the outer bands of a supercell system that will spawn multiple tornadoes. Rebecca followed Maya's gaze to the windows, and for a moment, uncertainty flickered across her features. The sky did look ominous, darker, and more turbulent than typical spring weather. But admitting error now would mean acknowledging that she had physically assaulted someone who might actually be qualified to save lives. "Dramatic clouds don't prove anything," Rebecca said, though her voice carried less conviction than before. "Weather can look threatening without being dangerous. That's why we rely on trained meteorologists, not consultants who show up unannounced making wild claims." Maya pulled out her backup phone, a specialized device connected to the National Weather Service's emergency network. The screen displayed real-time data from Doppler radar stations across a 6-state region, showing the supercell's development with terrifying clarity. "The storm's forward speed has increased to 45 miles per hour, Maya announced, her voice carrying over the growing wind outside. "The hook echo is becoming more pronounced, indicating strong rotation. We now have 34 minutes before the tornado reaches the eastern suburbs." Rebecca's composure was beginning to crack as the studio's emergency lighting activated, casting everything in an eerie red glow. The backup power systems were responding to atmospheric electrical activity that was interfering with the main grid. Exactly as Maya had predicted. "Turn off those emergency lights," Rebecca ordered the crew. "We don't need to create unnecessary drama." But Maya was already moving toward camera 2, her movements sharp and purposeful. "Viewers, if you're in the eastern districts, Riverside, Oakwood, or Parkland, you need to move to interior rooms on the lowest floor of sturdy buildings immediately. Avoid mobile homes and stay away from windows." "Cut her microphone," Rebecca shouted, but the technical crew was watching their own weather monitoring equipment with growing alarm. The real storm was just beginning. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence as the crew wrestled with conflicting orders. Rebecca demanded that Maya's microphone be cut, but the floor director was receiving urgent calls from the station manager's office. Outside, the tornado sirens had intensified, joined by the distinctive wail of emergency vehicles racing toward the eastern districts. Maya stepped forward, ignoring Rebecca's protests, and addressed camera 1 directly. "This is Dr. Maya Washington, and I'm speaking to save your lives. The tornado I predicted 30 minutes ago is now confirmed by Doppler radar. If you're in the danger zone, you have approximately 30 minutes to reach safety." Rebecca's face flushed with rage as she realized Maya was commandeering her broadcast. For 5 years, she had controlled every word spoken on Channel 7's morning show. Her authority was absolute, her credibility unquestioned. The idea that some unknown consultant could usurp her position was intolerable. "Security! I want her removed immediately," Rebecca screamed, pointing at Maya with trembling fingers. "This is my show, my studio, and I decide what information our viewers receive." The security guards looked between Rebecca and Maya uncertainly. They could hear the tornado sirens, see the increasingly violent weather outside, and feel the tension building in the studio. Maya's calm professionalism contrasted sharply with Rebecca's hysteria, creating doubt about who should be trusted. "Ma'am, we need to see some identification," the lead security guard said to Maya, his tone respectful but firm. "If you have credentials that verify your expertise, this situation could be resolved quickly." Maya reached slowly into her jacket, producing a leather folder that she had hoped not to use. Her cover had taken months to establish, and revealing her true identity would compromise ongoing operations across multiple states. But 50,000 lives outweighed operational security. "I am Dr. Maya Washington, Chief Meteorologist for the National Weather Service, Severe Weather Division," she announced, opening the folder to display her federal identification. "I'm also certified with the National Hurricane Center, the Storm Prediction Center, and FEMA's Emergency Response Coordination Team." The security guards examined the credentials carefully, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern to outright alarm. These weren't the simple certifications of a local weatherman. They represented the highest levels of meteorological authority in the United States. Rebecca snatched the credentials from the guard's hands, studying them with desperate intensity. The federal seals, the official signatures, the embedded security features, everything appeared authentic. But accepting their validity would mean admitting that she had physically assaulted the nation's chief expert on severe weather during an unprecedented emergency. These could be forgeries, Rebecca said weakly, though her voice lacked conviction. People fake government identification all the time. Just because someone has official-looking documents doesn't mean they're qualified to disrupt our programming. The Weather Service radio at Maya's belt crackled with urgent communications. All units, we have confirmed tornado touchdown. Repeat, confirmed touchdown. Multiple vortices detected moving northeast at 47 miles per hour. Estimated strength EF4, possibly EF5. Maya keyed the radio immediately. This is Washington Alpha 77. Confirm location of touchdown. Dr. Washington? The voice on the radio carried surprise and relief. Thank God you're there. Touchdown confirmed 2 miles southwest of Riverside Elementary, exactly as your models predicted. We're tracking multiple vortices with wind speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. The radio exchange hung in the air like a verdict. Rebecca's face went ashen as she realized the implications. Maya wasn't just credentialed, she was actively coordinating the emergency response. The woman she had dismissed and physically assaulted was literally the person in charge of protecting the region from natural disasters. That can't be real, Rebecca whispered. But her protests were drowned out by the increasing storm noise. The studio windows were beginning to vibrate with the force of the approaching system, and the emergency lighting was now fully activated. Maya turned back to the camera, her professional composure intact despite everything she had endured. Viewers in the path of this storm, you have approximately 25 minutes to reach safety. The tornado has confirmed touchdown and is moving exactly as I calculated. Do not attempt to drive away. You cannot outrun this system. Find the most interior room on the lowest floor of the most substantial building available. Rebecca made one last desperate attempt to regain control. This is still my show, she announced, stepping in front of Maya and facing the camera. Whatever credentials this woman may have, our viewers should wait for official emergency broadcasts before taking any drastic action. Maya's response was quiet, but devastating. Rebecca, I am the official emergency broadcast. Every weather alert, every tornado warning, every evacuation order in this region comes through my office. You're not contradicting a consultant, you're contradicting the federal government's emergency response system. The weight of Rebecca's error was becoming impossible to ignore. The storm was approaching exactly as Maya had predicted, with devastating precision. The radio communications confirmed that Maya was indeed coordinating the response, and the credentials appeared genuine to everyone who examined them. But admitting error now would mean accepting responsibility for nearly causing one of the greatest weather-related disasters in American history. Rebecca wasn't ready for that conversation. The first pieces of debris began striking the studio windows as the outer bands of the supercell system reached Channel 7's downtown location. Maya watched the barometric readings on her equipment with growing concern. The pressure drop was exceeding even her most pessimistic projections. This wasn't just going to be a devastating tornado. It was shaping up to be a historic weather event that would rewrite the meteorological textbooks. Rebecca clung to her anchor desk like a lifeline, her perfectly styled hair beginning to show signs of the humidity and electrical activity building outside. The studio's climate control systems were struggling against the atmospheric pressure changes, and several crew members were checking their phones for emergency alerts that were now streaming continuously. The Hook echo is intensifying, Maya announced, studying the Doppler radar data on her backup equipment. Wind speeds in the mesocyclone have reached 220 miles per hour. This is now definitively an EF5 tornado, and we have multiple satellite tornadoes forming along the periphery. Rebecca's voice was becoming increasingly shrill as her control over the situation continued to slip away. I don't care what your equipment says. Our regular meteorologist, Jim Peterson, assured our viewers just yesterday that severe weather season was essentially over. Tornadoes of that magnitude don't happen in this region during this time of year. Maya paused her data analysis to look directly at Rebecca, her expression mixing professional patience with growing frustration. Rebecca. EF5 tornadoes can occur anywhere in the continental United States when atmospheric conditions align. Your meteorologist's seasonal predictions don't override physics, temperature differentials, wind shear, atmospheric instability. These factors don't follow calendar schedules. The studio's backup weather monitoring system, which had been silent for months, suddenly activated with a cascade of alerts that filled the room with urgent electronic tones. The National Weather Service's automated emergency broadcast system was overriding local programming across the region, but Rebecca was refusing to allow the alerts to appear on Channel 7's main feed. "Turn off those alarms," Rebecca ordered the technical crew. "We're not going to panic our viewers based on automated systems that could be malfunctioning." Maya's patience finally reached its limit. "Those alerts are being generated by the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, based on data from 17 Doppler radar installations across 6 states. They're not malfunctioning. They're trying to save lives." The radio at Maya's belt crackled again. "Dr. Washington, we're getting reports of significant structural damage in Riverside. The tornado is moving exactly along your predicted path, but it's intensified beyond our initial projections. Current estimate is EF5 with multiple vortices." Maya keyed the radio immediately. "This is Washington. Confirmed multiple vortices?" "Affirmative. We're seeing satellite tornadoes forming along the main circulation. The damage path is expanding to nearly 2 miles wide. Your evacuation projections may have underestimated the affected area." Rebecca listened to the radio exchange with growing horror. The precision of Maya's predictions, the deference shown by the emergency responders, the technical sophistication of the communications, everything pointed to Maya being exactly who she claimed to be. But accepting that truth would mean confronting an almost unthinkable reality. She had dismissed and physically assaulted the person most qualified to protect the region during its worst natural disaster in recorded history. The legal, professional, and personal consequences would be devastating. "Radio communications can be faked," Rebecca said desperately, though her voice lacked any conviction. "Amateur radio operators do it all the time. Just because someone has official-sounding equipment doesn't mean they're actually coordinating emergency responses." Maya's expression shifted from patience to something approaching pity. "Rebecca, look around you. Look at what's happening outside. Look at the way the emergency services are responding. Look at the precision of the forecasts. At what point does skepticism become willful ignorance?" The studio windows were now being pelted with debris from the storm's outer bands, leaves, branches, pieces of roofing material, and other detritus picked up by winds that were approaching 100 miles per hour even at the storm's periphery. The main tornado was still 15 minutes away, but its presence was already being felt across the metropolitan area. Maya's specialized phone buzzed with an incoming priority call. She answered immediately, putting the call on speaker so the entire studio could hear. "Dr. Washington, this is Director Harrison from the National Hurricane Center. We're seeing unprecedented development in your supercell system. Are you in a secure location?" "Director, I'm currently at Channel 7 News, attempting to coordinate public evacuation through media channels. The tornado is tracking exactly as modeled, but intensification has exceeded projections." "Understood. FEMA has authorized implementation of Protocol 7. You have full authority to coordinate all emergency resources in the affected region. We're dispatching additional support, but you're the incident commander until they arrive." The call ended, leaving the studio in stunned silence. Protocol 7 was reserved for catastrophic natural disasters that threatened tens of thousands of lives. It gave Maya authority over local, state, and federal emergency resources, making her temporarily one of the most powerful people in the region. Rebecca stared at the phone in Maya's hand as if it were a loaded weapon. The conversation had been too specific, too technical, too coordinated to be fabricated. The horrible truth was becoming undeniable. She had assaulted the person now in charge of saving the entire metropolitan area. But the tornado was still coming, and there were still 20 minutes left to save 50,000 lives. The studio building groaned under the stress of winds that were now approaching severe thunderstorm levels, even though the tornado itself was still 8 miles away. Maya's equipment showed that the supercell had developed into what meteorologists called a violent tornado, the rarest and most destructive classification, capable of wiping entire communities from existence. Rebecca was no longer attempting to maintain her professional composure. Her makeup was running from nervous perspiration, her carefully styled hair was disheveled from the building's ventilation systems, struggling against the pressure changes, and her voice carried an edge of panic that no amount of media training could disguise. "Even if you are who you claim to be," Rebecca said, her words coming in rapid bursts, "you can't just take over our programming. This is still a private television station, and I'm still the anchor responsible for our content. Our viewers trust me to provide them with accurate information." Maya was simultaneously monitoring radar data, coordinating with emergency services, and tracking the tornado's path with equipment that cost more than most people's houses. Her ability to multitask under extreme pressure was the result of 15 years managing weather emergencies that had threatened millions of lives across multiple continents. "Rebecca, your viewers are going to be dead in 15 minutes if they don't take immediate action," Maya said without looking up from her instruments. "This isn't about television programming or professional authority. This is about preventing the worst natural disaster in this region's recorded history." The emergency radio crackled with increasingly urgent reports. "All units. Tornado has intensified to EF5 confirmed. Wind speeds now estimated at 250 miles per hour. Debris cloud visible from 40 miles away. This is the strongest tornado recorded in our region since records began." Maya keyed her radio. "This is Washington Alpha 77. What's the status of evacuation in the Riverside district?" "Dr. Washington, we've got approximately 60% evacuation compliance based on your initial warnings. The remaining residents either didn't receive the alerts or chose not to evacuate. Estimated 40,000 people still in the direct path." Rebecca gasped at the number. 40,000 people, more than the population of some entire towns, were potentially in mortal danger because of decisions being made in this studio over the past 20 minutes. Maya's fingers flew across her tablet as she calculated updated projections based on the tornado's intensification. The damage path has expanded to 5 miles wide. We're looking at complete destruction for everything in the primary path, with severe to catastrophic damage extending another mile on each side. The studio's main weather monitoring station, which had been relegated to displaying basic temperature and humidity readings, suddenly activated with priority alerts that overrode all local programming. The National Weather Service's emergency alert system was now broadcasting continuously across all media channels in the region. "Warning: violent tornado approaching metropolitan area. All residents in eastern districts must take immediate shelter. This is not a drill. Tornado intensity, EF5. Estimated arrival, 12 minutes. Rebecca watched the alert scroll across the monitor with growing horror. The precision of the timing, the specificity of the warnings, the coordination across multiple agencies, everything confirmed that Maya was indeed managing a massive emergency response operation from Channel 7's studio. "How is this possible?" Rebecca whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "How could someone just walk into our studio and be in charge of everything?" Maya paused her coordination efforts long enough to provide an explanation that she hoped would penetrate Rebecca's shock. "I've been operating undercover for 3 months as part of a federal study on emergency communication protocols. We needed to test how quickly accurate information could be disseminated through local media during a genuine crisis." The revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Not only was Maya the nation's chief severe weather expert, but she had been conducting an official government operation that Rebecca had unknowingly sabotaged through her prejudice and arrogance. "You mean this was planned?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The undercover operation was planned. The tornado is completely natural, but it provided the perfect test case for our communication protocols. Unfortunately, those protocols failed catastrophically due to media resistance to accepting expertise from unexpected sources. Maya's radio buzzed with another priority call. "Dr. Washington, we're getting reports of structural damage beginning in the outer suburbs. Mobile home parks in Oakdale have been evacuated, but several residents refuse to leave. We're also tracking satellite tornadoes forming along the main storm's periphery." Rebecca listened to the reports with mounting dread. Each update confirmed Maya's earlier predictions with frightening accuracy. The tornado was behaving exactly as Maya had forecasted, following the precise timeline she had established, affecting the specific locations she had identified. "The satellite tornadoes are a particularly dangerous development," Maya explained, while coordinating response efforts. "They're unpredictable, can form and dissipate rapidly, and extend the damage zone far beyond the main circulation. We are now looking at potential impacts across a 6-mile corridor." As if summoned by Maya's words, the studio lights flickered and went out, replaced immediately by the red glow of emergency power. The backup systems were responding to electrical grid failures as power lines throughout the region succumbed to the approaching storm's influence. In the eerie red light, Rebecca finally confronted the magnitude of her error. She had spent 25 precious minutes fighting the one person capable of saving her city. The tornado appeared on the studio's external cameras like something from humanity's worst nightmares, a massive wedge-shaped vortex nearly 2 miles wide, its funnel cloud extending from the ground to heights that disappeared into the storm's churning supercell. The debris cloud surrounding it was visible from 30 miles away, a dark mass of destruction that included pieces of buildings, vehicles, and trees torn from the earth with unimaginable violence. Maya watched the monitors with the grim satisfaction of someone whose worst predictions were being validated in real time. The tornado was tracking exactly along the path she had calculated 30 minutes earlier, moving at precisely the speed her models had projected, exhibiting the intensification patterns she had warned about. Rebecca stood frozen beside her anchor desk, staring at the images with an expression of pure horror. The tornado was massive beyond anything she had ever imagined possible, a force of nature so overwhelming that it seemed almost supernatural. The idea that this monster had been approaching for the past half hour, while she dismissed Maya's warnings, was almost too terrible to process. "Dear God," Rebecca whispered, her professional composure completely shattered. "It's exactly where you said it would be. It's exactly when you said it would happen." Maya keyed her radio with practiced efficiency. "All units, tornado is now visible from Channel 7 News downtown. Confirming EF5 intensity, multiple vortex structure, debris cloud extending to 40,000 feet. Estimated time to eastern suburbs, 8 minutes. The response came immediately from multiple emergency coordinators. "Dr. Washington, we're tracking the storm on all radar installations. Damage reports are coming in from the rural areas, complete destruction along the primary path. Several farms have been completely erased." Rebecca listened to the radio traffic with mounting terror. Complete destruction, buildings erased. And this monster was heading directly toward neighborhoods where families with children were huddled in basements and interior rooms, praying that Maya's warnings had given them enough time to find adequate shelter. "The multi-vortex structure is particularly devastating," Maya explained while updating her tracking models. "Multiple tornadoes are orbiting within the main circulation, each capable of EF3 or EF4 damage on its own. The combined effect creates a damage pattern unlike anything most people have ever seen." Maya's specialized equipment showed details that the regular news cameras couldn't capture: the tornado's internal structure, the locations of the satellite vortices, the precise measurements of wind speed and debris height. Her instruments were providing data that would be studied by meteorologists for decades, documenting one of the most powerful tornadoes ever recorded. "How many people?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely audible over the storm noise that was now penetrating the studio. "How many people are still in the path?" Maya consulted her evacuation tracking data, information compiled from emergency services across 6 counties. "Based on the latest reports, we estimate 35,000 people took shelter based on the warnings. That leaves approximately 15,000 who either didn't receive the alerts, didn't believe them, or couldn't evacuate in time. 15,000 people. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Rebecca realized that her resistance to Maya's warnings, her insistence on maintaining control of the narrative, her physical assault on the person trying to coordinate the evacuation, all of it might have contributed to people dying. The external cameras tracked the tornado as it approached the first major residential area, Riverside Elementary School, which Maya had specifically mentioned in her initial warnings, sat directly in the storm's path. The building appeared deserted, a testament to the evacuation procedures that had been implemented based on Maya's precise predictions. Riverside Elementary is secure, Maya announced after receiving confirmation through her radio. All students and staff evacuated to the designated shelter sites. The building will likely be destroyed, but everyone who was there this morning is safe. Rebecca watched the school disappear into the tornado's debris cloud with a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that Maya's warnings had saved those children. Horror at the realization of what would have happened if the evacuation hadn't been ordered. Maya's phone buzzed with a priority call that she immediately put on speaker. "Dr. Washington, this is Governor Martinez. I'm watching your situation from the State Emergency Center. Do you need additional resources?" "Governor, we need National Guard helicopters for post-storm search and rescue, medical teams standing by at hospitals outside the damage zone, and utility crews preparing for complete infrastructure failure across a 6-county area. Consider it done. Dr. Washington, I want you to know that your coordination of this emergency response is extraordinary. The number of lives you've saved today." The governor's praise was interrupted by Maya keying her radio. "All units, tornado is now impacting the Riverside district. Repeat. Tornado has reached the residential areas. All emergency responders should prepare for immediate search and rescue operations once the storm passes." Rebecca stared at Maya with something approaching awe. This woman, whom she had dismissed, mocked, and physically assaulted, was simultaneously coordinating rescue efforts across multiple states, communicating with governors and federal agencies, and managing the most complex emergency response operation the region had ever seen, all while maintaining the calm professionalism that Rebecca had mistaken for incompetence. The tornado was now 4 minutes from downtown, and the real test of Maya's evacuation efforts was about to begin. The tornado sirens throughout the city reached a crescendo as the massive vortex approached the urban core. Its debris cloud now blocking out the afternoon sun and casting the entire metropolitan area into an apocalyptic twilight. Maya's equipment registered wind speeds that were pushing the limits of the enhanced Fujita scale, with some measurements suggesting that this tornado might exceed even EF5 classifications. Rebecca had abandoned any pretense of maintaining control over the broadcast. She stood beside Maya's position, watching the coordination of the largest emergency response operation in the region's history, with a mixture of fascination and growing dread about her own role in nearly sabotaging it. "The tornado's forward speed has increased to 55 miles per hour, Maya announced into her radio. All emergency personnel should prepare for impact in the downtown corridor in approximately 3 minutes. Maya paused her coordination efforts and turned to face camera 1 directly, her expression carrying the weight of someone who had spent her career making life-and-death decisions for millions of people. "I need to tell you something, Rebecca. And I need to tell the viewers something that will help them understand what happened here today," Maya said, her voice cutting through the storm noise with quiet authority. Rebecca nodded mutely, no longer capable of interrupting or challenging anything Maya might say. "My name is Dr. Maya Washington, and I am the Chief Meteorologist for the National Weather Service's Severe Weather Division. But that's not the only reason I'm here today." Maya reached into her jacket and withdrew a second set of credentials, these bearing the seal of the Department of Homeland Security. "I'm also the Director of the Federal Emergency Communication Protocol Initiative, a program designed to test how effectively life-saving information can be transmitted through local media during genuine emergencies." Rebecca's face went ashen as the implications became clear. "You mean this was a test? The tornado is completely natural, a genuine meteorological emergency that has unfortunately provided the perfect test case for our communication protocols. I've been working undercover for 3 months, establishing credibility as a freelance consultant, preparing for exactly this type of situation. Maya's radio crackled with urgent updates. Dr. Washington, this is Command Center Alpha. We have confirmation that your federal operation has been activated to full emergency status. All local, state, and federal emergency resources are now under your direct command for this incident. Rebecca listened to the radio exchange with growing horror. Not only had she assaulted the nation's chief meteorologist, but she had interfered with a federal emergency operation designed to save lives during natural disasters. The communication protocol test was designed to determine how quickly accurate information could be disseminated when delivered by sources that local media might initially dismiss. Maya explained while continuing to monitor the tornado's approach. Unfortunately, the test revealed catastrophic flaws in our emergency communication systems. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. What kind of flaws? Media gatekeepers who prioritize maintaining control over information rather than protecting public safety. Anchors who dismiss expertise based on appearance rather than credentials. Communication systems that fail when they encounter unexpected sources of authority. Maya turned back to her equipment as the tornado reached the outer edge of the downtown district. The results of this test will be presented to Congress as evidence that our current emergency communication protocols are inadequate for protecting American lives. The weight of Rebecca's actions was becoming clear. Her resistance to Maya's warnings hadn't just endangered 50,000 people. It had exposed systemic failures that could affect emergency responses nationwide. The tornado's approach to downtown triggered every emergency alert system in the metropolitan area simultaneously, creating a cacophony of sirens, alarms, and automated warnings that penetrated even the reinforced walls of the Channel 7 studio. Maya's specialized equipment registered atmospheric pressure drops that were literally off the charts. Measurements that would require meteorologists to revise their understanding of what was meteorologically possible. Rebecca watched Maya coordinate the emergency response with growing amazement. Every decision Maya made was implemented immediately by emergency services across multiple states. Her authority was absolute, her expertise unquestioned by everyone, except the person who had spent 30 minutes dismissing her warnings. "Dr. Washington," came a voice through the radio, "this is Director Chen from FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. We're monitoring your operation from the National Emergency Center. The President has been briefed and is standing by for updates." Rebecca's legs nearly gave out. The President of the United States was being briefed about the situation unfolding in their studio, a situation that Rebecca had nearly sabotaged through her arrogance and prejudice. "Director Chen, the tornado is now impacting the urban core," Maya responded. "We're implementing Protocol 7 across a 6-county area. Estimated affected population is approaching 200,000 people when we include secondary impacts from infrastructure failure." Maya paused her federal coordination to address Rebecca directly. "There's something else you need to know about why I was here today, specifically at Channel 7, specifically on your show." Rebecca braced herself for another revelation that would further compound her errors. Channel 7 was selected for this test because your morning show has the highest ratings in the region, reaching approximately 60% of households in the danger zone. Your credibility with viewers could literally mean the difference between life and death during an emergency. The information hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Her show, her credibility, her influence with viewers, all of it had been identified as crucial for protecting public safety, and she had used that influence to dismiss and discredit the person trying to save lives. "But there's more," Maya continued, her voice taking on an edge that Rebecca had never heard before. Channel 7's ownership structure made it particularly important for our test. Rebecca looked confused. "Our ownership structure." Maya accessed a file on her tablet and showed Rebecca information that made her face go completely white. Channel 7 News is owned by Turner Broadcasting Enterprises, a subsidiary of Turner Media Holdings. The majority shareholder and CEO of Turner Media Holdings is Rebecca Turner, your father. The revelation struck Rebecca like lightning. Her father owned the station where she worked. which meant Maya's test had been designed to evaluate not just media gatekeepers in general, but the specific failures that occurred when nepotism replaced merit in positions of public trust. "For you're telling me this was all targeted at my family's company?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely audible. "Your father's media empire reaches 43 million households across 16 states, Maya explained. His station's emergency communication policies could affect the survival rates during natural disasters for nearly 1/8 of the American population." Maya's radio buzzed with another priority call. "Dr. Washington, this is Attorney General Harrison. We've been monitoring the Federal Communication Protocol test from the Justice Department. Based on preliminary results, we're prepared to initiate investigations into media companies that failed to cooperate with emergency communication protocols." Rebecca realized that her actions hadn't just endangered lives, they had potentially exposed her family's entire media empire to federal investigation and prosecution. The Turner Broadcasting Network's resistance to federal emergency communications during a Category 5 tornado will be cited in our report to Congress, Maya continued. This incident will likely result in new federal regulations governing how media companies must respond to emergency communications from qualified federal experts. Rebecca's world was collapsing around her. Her career, her family's business, her credibility, her legal exposure. Everything was being destroyed by 30 minutes of prejudice and arrogance. But Maya wasn't finished. "There's one more thing you need to know, Rebecca. Your father didn't know about the federal test, but he did know about my real identity." Rebecca looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Robert Turner and I served together on the National Emergency Communication Advisory Board for 2 years. He knows my credentials, my authority, and my role in federal emergency management. When I requested permission to conduct this test using one of his stations, he approved it immediately. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Rebecca's own father had authorized the operation that she had sabotaged. Her dismissal of Maya hadn't just contradicted federal expertise, it had contradicted her father's explicit approval of that expertise. "He's watching this broadcast live from Turner Media's headquarters in Atlanta," Maya added, "along with representatives from the FCC, FEMA, and the Department of Homeland Security." Rebecca realized that her humiliation was being witnessed by the most powerful people in American media and emergency management, including her own father. The tornado was now directly overhead. But the storm in Rebecca's life was just beginning. The Channel 7 building shuddered as the tornado's outer circulation passed directly overhead, its winds reaching velocities that made the reinforced structure groan and flex like a living thing. Maya's instruments registered pressure readings that were beyond the measurement capabilities of standard equipment. They were documenting a meteorological event that would be studied for decades. Rebecca sat in stunned silence, processing the cascading revelations that had destroyed her understanding of everything she thought she knew about this morning's events. Her father had approved the federal test. The president was being briefed. Her family's media empire was under federal scrutiny. And she had physically assaulted the person coordinating the largest emergency response operation in regional history. Maya's specialized phone buzzed with an incoming call that she immediately put on speaker. "Dr. Washington, this is your father, Professor Emeritus William Washington, from Howard University's Atmospheric Sciences Department. Are you safe?" Rebecca's eyes widened as she realized there was yet another dimension to Maya's identity that she had failed to consider. "Dad, I'm secure and coordinating the response from Channel 7 News. The tornado is behaving exactly as our models predicted, but the intensity has exceeded projections. Maya, I'm watching your coordination from the university's emergency center with representatives from NOAA, the National Science Foundation, and NASA. Your real-time data is being distributed to research institutions across the country. This storm will advance meteorological science by decades." Rebecca listened to the conversation with growing amazement. Maya's father was apparently a distinguished professor emeritus, which meant she came from a family of scientific experts. The dismissal of Maya's qualifications became even more absurd when viewed in this context. "Professor Washington," came another voice through the phone. "This is Dr. Martinez from the National Science Foundation. Your daughter's coordination of this emergency response, while simultaneously collecting research-quality data, is extraordinary. We'd like to discuss expanding her federal authority for future operations." Maya smiled slightly at the recognition, but her focus remained on the immediate emergency. "We can discuss future operations after we've saved the people currently in danger. The tornado is beginning to weaken as it moves through the urban core, but we still have critical search and rescue operations to coordinate." Rebecca found her voice for the first time in several minutes. "Maya, I need to understand something. If your father is a distinguished professor, if you have all these federal authorities, if the president is being briefed about this situation, why did you come here disguised as a simple consultant?" Maya paused her coordination efforts to provide an explanation that would help Rebecca understand the scope of her errors. Because emergency communication systems fail most often when information comes from sources that local gatekeepers don't immediately recognize as authoritative. A well-dressed white male meteorologist from a major university would never have been dismissed the way you dismissed me. The explanation cut to the heart of Rebecca's prejudices. Maya was right. If a white male professor had arrived with the same warnings, Rebecca would have deferred to his expertise immediately. Her resistance had been based on assumptions about who could and couldn't possess legitimate authority. The federal test was specifically designed to measure how racial and gender bias affects emergency communication effectiveness, Maya continued. Your behavior today provided perfect documentation of how prejudice can literally kill people during natural disasters. Maya's radio crackled with urgent updates from the Emergency Coordination Center. Dr. Washington, preliminary damage assessments are coming in. The tornado tracked exactly along your predicted path, but evacuation compliance in the areas where your warnings were broadcast reached 93%. Estimated lives saved, 47,000 people. Rebecca gasped at the number. 47,000 people were alive, because Maya had successfully coordinated their evacuation, despite every obstacle Rebecca had placed in her path. However, the radio continued, areas that received delayed or contradictory information experienced much lower evacuation compliance. We're estimating that media resistance to your warnings may have resulted in 3 to 7 preventable fatalities. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. People had died. Not from the tornado itself, but from delays and confusion in the emergency communication system. Delays and confusion that Rebecca had directly contributed to through her dismissal of Maya's expertise. Maya's expression was grave as she processed the casualty estimates. Media gatekeepers who prioritize their own authority over expert information during emergencies become directly responsible for preventable deaths. This incident will be used as a case study in emergency communication failures for decades to come. Rebecca realized that her actions today would be studied in universities, cited in federal reports, and used as an example of how prejudice can have deadly consequences during natural disasters. Her 30 minutes of arrogance had become a permanent part of the historical record of emergency management failures. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. Maya wasn't just documenting communication failures for academic study. She was building a federal case that could result in criminal charges for anyone whose actions had contributed to preventable deaths during the emergency. And Rebecca had just admitted her culpability on live television in front of federal investigators. As the tornado moved beyond the urban core and began its gradual weakening over less populated rural areas, Maya transformed from meteorologist to incident commander, coordinating the largest search and rescue operation in the region's history. Her radio crackled with reports from dozens of emergency teams now swarming into the affected areas, and her federal authority allowed her to mobilize resources that would normally require hours of bureaucratic approval. Rebecca watched in silent amazement as Maya simultaneously coordinated helicopter rescue missions, directed medical response teams, managed utility restoration efforts, and communicated with federal agencies, all while maintaining the calm professionalism that Rebecca had so drastically underestimated. All air rescue units, this is Washington Alpha 77. Maya spoke into her radio, with the precision of someone accustomed to commanding complex operations. Priority locations for immediate search and rescue: Riverside Elementary, Oakwood Shopping Center, Memorial Hospital Auxiliary Building. Secondary sweep areas include all mobile home parks between coordinates. Maya rattled off precise GPS coordinates from memory, directing helicopter pilots to specific locations where her evacuation models predicted the highest likelihood of finding survivors who might need assistance. Her knowledge of the affected area was encyclopedic, covering not just meteorological impacts, but also population density, building construction standards, and emergency shelter locations. "Dr. Washington, this is Rescue Team Alpha," came a voice through the radio. "We're at Riverside Elementary. The building sustained major structural damage, but it's completely empty. Your evacuation order saved approximately 400 students and staff who would have been in the building during impact." Rebecca felt a wave of relief mixed with horror. Relief that the children were safe. Horror at realizing what would have happened if Maya's warnings had been delayed even 15 more minutes by Rebecca's resistance. Maya's specialized equipment was now tracking the tornado's dissipation as it moved into less populated areas, but her attention had shifted to coordinating the massive humanitarian response that would be needed in the storm's aftermath. FEMA Mobile Command. "This is Dr. Washington," she spoke into another communication device. "We need immediate deployment of emergency shelters with capacity for approximately 15,000 displaced persons. Medical teams should prepare for trauma cases, but early reports suggest fatalities are much lower than initially feared due to evacuation compliance." Rebecca realized she was witnessing history being made. Maya's coordination of this emergency response would be studied in emergency management programs, referenced in federal policy documents, and remembered as a textbook example of how scientific expertise and federal authority could work together to minimize disaster casualties. Maya's phone buzzed with another priority call that she put on speaker. "Dr. Washington, this is Chief of Staff Morrison from the White House. The President wants to speak with you directly about the emergency response coordination." Rebecca's knees nearly buckled. The President of the United States wanted to speak directly with the woman Rebecca had dismissed as an unqualified consultant just 45 minutes earlier. "Mr. Morrison, I'm still in active incident command mode," Maya responded. "Can the President's call be delayed until we've completed initial search and rescue operations?" "Dr. Washington, the President is prepared to wait. He wanted me to tell you that your coordination of this emergency response is being watched by emergency management officials worldwide. This is likely to become a model for international disaster response protocols." Maya's work was being observed not just nationally, but internationally, by experts who would use this incident to improve emergency response systems around the world. Rebecca had interfered with an operation that would influence disaster preparedness on a global scale. As rescue reports continued streaming in, a pattern became clear. Areas that had received Maya's direct warnings showed evacuation compliance rates above 90%, while areas that had received delayed or contradictory information showed significantly lower compliance and higher casualty rates. The correlation between information source credibility and evacuation compliance is extremely clear, Maya noted while updating her incident reports. Areas where my warnings were presented as credible scientific information showed immediate response. Areas where my warnings were questioned or delayed showed dangerous hesitation. Rebecca realized that Maya was documenting not just the tornado response, but the media response, creating a permanent record of how journalistic gatekeeping had affected public safety during a genuine emergency. Maya's radio crackled with a report that brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. "Dr. Washington, final casualty count from the affected areas: 4 fatalities, 37 serious injuries, approximately 200 minor injuries. Given the tornado's intensity and the population density of the affected areas, this represents a casualty rate 94% lower than historical averages for comparable events. 47,000 people had been saved by Maya's warnings and coordination. Only 4 had died in what should have been one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history." Rebecca looked at Maya with something approaching awe. finally understanding that she had been in the presence of someone whose expertise had literally rewritten the mathematics of disaster survival. But Maya's expression remained somber. 4 preventable deaths is still 4 too many. Every delay in emergency communication, every moment of doubt or resistance, every second of prejudice or gatekeeping increases the likelihood that someone won't make it home to their family. The immediate emergency response phase was winding down, but Maya's federal authority meant she would remain incident commander until full recovery operations were complete. Her coordination had transformed what should have been a catastrophic disaster into a textbook example of effective emergency management, but the documentation phase was about to reveal the systemic failures that had nearly caused a much different outcome. Rebecca's phone buzzed with an incoming call that made her blood run cold. "Rebecca, this is your father calling from Atlanta." "I need to speak with you immediately." Robert Turner's voice carried the weight of someone who had built a media empire through decades of careful decision-making and who was now watching his daughter destroy everything he had worked to create. "Dad, I can explain," Rebecca began, but her father interrupted. "Rebecca, I'm watching your broadcast live along with representatives from the Federal Communications Commission, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security. Do you understand what you've done?" Maya paused her federal coordination to listen to the conversation, recognizing that Rebecca's professional reckoning was about to begin in earnest. "Dr. Maya Washington is one of the most respected meteorologists in the world," Robert Turner continued, his voice carrying disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "I personally approved her federal test operation because I believed Channel 7 could demonstrate how responsible media companies respond to emergency communications. Instead, you've created a case study in how prejudice and ego can override public safety." Rebecca tried to respond, but her father wasn't finished. "The Justice Department representatives are taking notes on everything they've witnessed today. Your physical assault on a federal official during an emergency operation could result in federal charges. Your interference with emergency communications could result in civil liability for any casualties that occurred due to delayed warnings." Maya's expression was professionally neutral, but Rebecca could see the documentation process continuing in real time. Every word of this conversation was being recorded, every decision was being analyzed, every failure was being catalogued for inclusion in federal reports that would influence policy for decades. "Rebecca," her father continued, "effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties at Channel 7 News. Your actions today have exposed Turner Broadcasting to federal investigation, civil liability, and regulatory sanctions that could affect our operating licenses across 16 states." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. Her career, her professional identity, her relationship with her father, everything was being destroyed by 45 minutes of arrogance and prejudice. Maya's radio crackled with an update that provided context for Rebecca's situation. "Dr. Washington, this is Legal Counsel Davidson from the Department of Justice. We've completed preliminary review of the incident documentation. Channel 7's interference with federal emergency communications during a declared disaster could result in violations of multiple federal statutes." Rebecca realized that her actions hadn't just cost her personally. They had potentially exposed her family's entire media empire to federal prosecution. "However," the legal counsel continued, "Dr. Washington's successful coordination of the emergency response, despite media interference, actually demonstrates the resilience of federal emergency management systems. The documentation from this incident will be used to strengthen emergency communication protocols nationwide." Maya responded with the precision of someone accustomed to interacting with federal legal authorities. "Legal Counsel Davidson, my recommendation is that media companies be required to undergo emergency communication training and certification before being permitted to override federal emergency broadcasts during declared disasters." Rebecca listened with growing horror as Maya effectively recommended federal regulation of the entire media industry based on Rebecca's behavior during this morning's emergency. Maya's phone buzzed with another call that she put on speaker. "Dr. Washington, This is Director Martinez from the National Hurricane Center. Your coordination of today's emergency response was extraordinary, but we need to discuss the broader implications for emergency communication policy. Director Martinez, I'll be submitting a comprehensive report within 72 hours. The test results clearly indicate that current media gatekeeping practices are inadequate for protecting public safety during natural disasters. Rebecca realized that Maya's report would likely result in federal legislation requiring media companies to defer to federal expertise during emergencies, legislation that would fundamentally change how news organizations operated during crisis situations. But the most devastating revelation came in Maya's next radio communication. All units, this is Washington Alpha 77. The Federal Emergency Communication Protocol test is now complete. All participating agencies should preserve documentation for congressional review. This incident will be presented to Congress as evidence supporting the Emergency Media Accountability Act, currently under consideration. Rebecca's interference with Maya's warnings hadn't just affected today's emergency response. It had provided ammunition for federal legislation that would regulate the entire media industry. Her 45 minutes of prejudice were about to change American media forever, and not in ways that would benefit companies like her father's Turner Broadcasting empire. As Maya continued coordinating recovery efforts with the calm professionalism that Rebecca had so drastically misjudged, Rebecca realized that she had destroyed not only her own career, but potentially her family's entire media legacy. The woman she had dismissed as an unqualified consultant was about to reshape American emergency communications policy, using Rebecca's own actions as the primary evidence for why such changes were necessary. 3 weeks after the tornado that would be remembered as the Channel 7 incident, Maya stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, wearing the same professional attire that Rebecca Turner had dismissed as inadequate for television. The Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony was being broadcast live to millions of viewers, many of whom remembered watching Maya coordinate the tornado response from Channel 7's studio. President Harrison stepped forward with the medal, his words carrying across the nation. Dr. Maya Washington's coordination of emergency response during one of the most powerful tornadoes in American history saved an estimated 47,000 lives. Her professionalism in the face of media resistance and personal attacks exemplifies the highest standards of federal service. Rebecca watched the ceremony from her apartment, having been terminated from Channel 7 and facing federal charges for interfering with emergency communications during a declared disaster. Her journalism career was over, her family's media empire was under federal investigation, and her name had become synonymous with how prejudice could override public safety during emergencies. The president continued, Dr. Washington's documentation of communication failures during the tornado emergency has led to the passage of the Emergency Media Accountability Act, which requires all broadcast licensees to undergo federal certification for emergency communication protocols. The legislation that Maya had effectively authored, using Rebecca's behavior as evidence, was now federal law, fundamentally changing how media companies must respond to expert information during natural disasters. Rebecca's 45 minutes of prejudice had inadvertently revolutionized American emergency communications. Maya stepped forward to receive the medal, her acceptance speech carrying the authority of someone whose expertise had been validated by both scientific results and federal recognition. This recognition belongs not just to me, but to all emergency responders who work tirelessly to protect American lives during natural disasters. The tornado response demonstrated that expertise and preparation can overcome even the most powerful forces of nature. Maya paused, and Rebecca knew what was coming. However, this incident also revealed dangerous gaps in our emergency communication systems. Media gatekeepers who prioritize ratings or personal authority over scientific expertise during emergencies become directly responsible for preventable casualties. The words were delivered without malice, but Rebecca knew they were directed at her. Maya was using this national platform to ensure that no other emergency responder would face the kind of resistance that had nearly cost 47,000 lives. The new federal emergency communication protocols will ensure that qualified experts can reach the American people with life-saving information, regardless of how they appear to media gatekeepers who may not recognize legitimate authority. Maya's speech was simultaneously gracious and devastating, acknowledging the successful emergency response while ensuring that Rebecca's failures were permanently preserved in the historical record of American disaster preparedness. As the ceremony concluded, Maya's phone buzzed with a priority message that she read aloud to the assembled crowd. Final statistics from the Channel 7 tornado incident: 47,312 lives saved through coordinated evacuation. 4 fatalities, all in areas where emergency communications were delayed or contradicted by local media gatekeepers. Rebecca closed her laptop, unable to continue watching the ceremony that highlighted her professional destruction. The 4 preventable deaths weighed on her conscience more than her ruined career or her family's legal troubles. Maya concluded her acceptance speech with words that would be quoted in emergency management textbooks for decades. Science doesn't care about appearances, prejudices, or assumptions about who can and cannot possess expertise. Natural disasters don't pause, while media gatekeepers decide whether to trust qualified professionals. Lives depend on information being transmitted accurately and immediately, regardless of the source. The ceremony ended with Maya being congratulated by congressional leaders who had used the Channel 7 incident as the primary justification for the Emergency Media Accountability Act. Rebecca's behavior had not only ended her career, but had also provided the evidence needed to pass federal legislation that would prevent similar incidents in the future. 6 months later, Rebecca received a final piece of correspondence related to the tornado incident. A notice that Dr. Maya Washington had been appointed as the first director of the Federal Emergency Communication Authority, a new agency created to oversee media compliance with emergency communication protocols. The woman Rebecca had dismissed as an unqualified consultant was now the federal official, responsible for regulating every television and radio station in America during emergency situations. Maya's appointment letter included a brief personal note. "Rebecca, I hope you understand that this was never about personal vindication. It was about ensuring that no emergency responder ever again faces the resistance that nearly cost 47,000 lives. Professional expertise must be respected regardless of appearances, and public safety must always override personal prejudices." The note was signed Dr. Maya Washington, Director, Federal Emergency Communication Authority, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. Rebecca folded the letter carefully, understanding that Maya had transformed a morning of personal humiliation into a career culminating in federal authority over the very industry that had dismissed her expertise. The tornado had lasted only 30 minutes, but its impact on American emergency communications would endure forever. Thank you to everyone who typed respect and shared your locations with us. Seeing this global community united for scientific expertise proves that knowledge is a universal human value. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more stories of experts triumphing over ignorance. Until next time, remember that science saves lives when we listen to qualified professionals.